VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We're talking about the Vikings who got off the schneid, got in the win column, albeit against in the middle of a rebuilding team with the Panthers. But we're not going to let that dampen our enthusiasm. This is a show about optimism for the most part. We get to 1-5, 1-6, we might have a different tone, but we're not there yet. I don't think we're going to get there. I'm here with Josh Frey, who is the editor at purpleptsd.com. I'm going to guess he's slightly rejuvenated by this Vikings win. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. And yeah, that definitely just a few of the things that we saw last week that we haven't seen over the first 3 weeks from this team. It definitely rejuvenated my spirits a little bit. Harrison Smith was just a classic Harrison Smith play that 14 weeks from now, if we're looking back on it and this team somehow sneaks into the playoffs, that's going to be the play that essentially saved the season. And yeah, definitely in better spirits this week than we were last week at this time after the Chargers game.
Oh no, that felt like a funeral, and rightfully so at 0-3. But yeah, the win in Charlotte, depending on how this all plays out, will be considered a season saver, especially the Wanham touchdown plus the Harrison Smith strip sack fumble. But now it's just a matter whether or not they turn it into something. They probably won't beat the Chiefs. I don't think either one of us is picking that. But thereafter, the schedule if you can exclude the 49ers, the schedule gets a little less meaty. You don't have Herberts and Mahomeses and Hurts. And I don't have Burrow until week 15. I'm not even convinced he's going to be available by the time they get there. But we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. We have the Chiefs this week. The Vikings are 5-point underdogs. If that line holds, it will be their biggest underdog in the history of US Bank Stadium outside of a week 19 game where they rested the starters against the Bears. So I've asked you, kind sir, to come up with, if this win's every week you have to start to talk yourself into, like, how can the Vikings beat this team? We had to do it for the Eagles, and now we have to do it for the Chiefs, who are the world champs. So I've asked you to come up with the blueprint. So kick us off. If the Vikings are going to beat the Chiefs, how will it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely never an easy task when you're talking about going up against a defending Super Bowl champ. But I do think that the Chiefs have a few red flags right now that the Vikings would be able to exploit on Sunday if they're going to be able to win this game. And first and foremost, I think it comes down to stopping the run with this Kansas City Chiefs team. They've been one of the best teams at running the football all season. Isaiah Pacheco had an incredible game last week against the Jets that they desperately needed, with Patrick Mahomes having one of his worst games of his entire career. But yeah, last week, the Vikings did a really good job of limiting the Panthers in the running game. 31 carries, only 82 yards. It was like 2.8 yards per carry, something crazy like that. So if they're able to replicate that type of game, I do think that the Vikings have a decent chance at winning this game, or at least keeping it close and covering that 5-point spread like you alluded to. So yeah, that's the first and foremost thing, just stopping the run, and then you got to establish it on the other side of the ball too. Alexander Mattison and Cam Akers were really good for the Vikings last week, and Akers had 8 yards per carry in his first game as a Viking, which I'll take that any day of the week for sure. So yeah, just winning in the trenches overall is going to be a big key in this game.
It's a little odd. I should say it's bittersweet, the Vikings run defense, because it's as if when they want to use the personnel to stop the run, they can. If they're not in the mood to use it, like against the Eagles, where it's like, well, we're going to play defensive backs and linebackers on the line of scrimmage. It's like, it's no wonder you're going to get gashed up the middle.
Yeah, and I think that overall, this kind of feels like a game where they're going to be able to get away with using some of these like the Harrison Smith, playing him closer to the line of scrimmage. I think you're going to be able to get away with that against the Chiefs a little bit more than you would against a team like the Eagles, where they've got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith on the outside. You have to worry about those guys. Whereas the Chiefs, they have a decent wide receiver core, but it's nothing compared to the years past, or like Tyreek Hill being there and Mecole Hardman, and you have to worry about all these guys spreading the field. They have a decent core in Rashee Rice, the rookie, Sky Moore, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, but it's definitely not anything compared to what it's been in the years past. So I think that they've got a pretty decent shot here.
So this will make some folks paranoid. This is not the goal, but the Chiefs have the exact same wide receiving core as the Giants. It's the same. It's like just a bunch of guys who are pretty good, and Mahomes will make them look good if they don't drop the ball. but it's that same feel. And, last year against the Ed Donatel defense, that worked. A bunch of guys became household names and quarterbacks got paid as a result of 2 games against the Vikings. But if you play fantasy football or you just watch the games in general, you can do the Spider-Man meme with the Giants receiving core and the Chiefs. Now, the only difference is that Travis Kelce actually performs and is significantly better than Darren Waller ever was. And it feels like with Waller, we digress. He might just be washed. He doesn't look like himself. That whole team is in shambles inexplicably. But yeah, I totally agree with you that you had to stay honest or sell out in the Eagles game to stop Devonta Smith or A.J. Brown. And I think that had to be the mindset because they're like, well, we're going to give up 10 yards per rush because we don't want one of these guys to beat us. Because otherwise, you should play some defensive linemen or activate Kyrus Tonga or something. And they didn't really do that against the Eagles. It was a bold strategy, Cotton, and it didn't work. All right, so win in the trenches, especially on rush defense, what would be the second plank on your ladder?
I think you've got a really good opportunity here to attack Juwan Taylor at that right tackle spot. He leads the league in terms of penalties for offensive linemen right now with 10.
And
Akeem Ikwanwu is second. And the Vikings did a really good job of taking advantage of that matchup last weekend. So it really feels like this is another opportunity to get a Danielle Hunter, a Marcus Davenport lined up on Juwan Taylor and really take advantage of that matchup. He's been a pretty decent pass protector over the course of his first 4 years with the Jaguars, but this year it's been horrendous. Like there was all the talk about the penalties that weren't called in week 1, and now he's starting to get those penalties called against him. And PFF has him at a 40.4 overall grade for the entire season. So if they can establish some sort of pass rush as well, I think that if you can put a little bit of pressure on Patrick Mahomes, and he doesn't have all the time in the world to throw to these wide receivers like he has over the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, then again, it really is going to come down to the trenches. And I think that if they can establish that pass rush, stop the run, that the Vikings have a chance here.
And for those who aren't intimately familiar with the Chiefs that only see him on primetime, this is the guy that notably rocks back a half second for the play starts and only gets called for false start 50% of the time or so.
Yep, that's the guy.
And he'll line up against Davenport or Hunter.
He's at right tackle, so I feel like they probably will switch it up a bit. Yeah, so it'll probably be a mixture of both if I were to guess, and then probably throw in DJ Wanham too, who surprised us all with a pretty good game against the Panthers last week. So he definitely needed that. But yeah, with those 3 guys consistently going against Juwan Taylor, I think this is a matchup that the Vikings can exploit.
So what happened in your estimation? We saw in the 2020 Super Bowl, the Chiefs offensive line was pathetic. They fixed it almost in a single month in the offseason. And is it temporarily back to the struggle bus, or what are we doing?
I think it is. I know that the Chiefs, they thought they were going to get like the Jaguars version of Juwan Taylor, which has been a very good player over the course of his career. Last year, he graded out as a 75.9 in pass protection, only gave up 5 sacks over the entire season. And that's pretty much where he's been through the entire course of his career. It's just this year, it hasn't panned out for the Chiefs at all. And it really doesn't feel like it's going to get that much better anytime soon. So I think that especially on that right-hand side, the Vikings are going to be able to win some of those matchups.
I want to get your take on my theory that just kind of popped in my head last night. I'm going to write about it before the Chiefs game. It's my opinion, I think this will hold steady, that Marcus Davenport will be the single most the X factor, the difference maker in this game, because we've already seen what life without him is like for 3 weeks. And against a shitty Panthers team, he showed up. He had 2 pressures, a sack, QB hit, I think a tackle for loss. And he basically was the Marcus Davenport that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah envisioned when he signed him. So what I think, based on what we've seen in 4 games, is if Marcus Davenport can get home once or twice on Patrick Mahomes, it should allow for all the other 100 blitzers that Brian Flores will inevitably send. Is that a sensible theory?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it is going to come down to getting some pressure on Patrick Mahomes, because when he has all the time in the world to throw, he's going to be able to make all the sorts of plays that we've seen him make over the course of his career. Heading into through the first 4 weeks of the season, he currently has the 7th highest time to throw, though, which is partly because he's just a very mobile quarterback, and I think another part is just they haven't faced a very great pass rush over the course of the season, at least to start. I mean, we saw it against the Bears a couple weeks ago where he was just lighting them up. He was lighting up that defense the entire game. But yeah, he's at 2.96 seconds time to throw, and that's very comparable to what Bryce Young is at right now. He's at 2.93, and I think that's a matter of just his ability to roll out of the pocket, create plays with his legs, and then find these receivers. But if he doesn't have the time to find these receivers, this receiver core isn't that great. I mean, so if they're not able to get open in time, if they're not able to wait 3 seconds and then just find an open lane, then I think that there's going to be a shot at getting some of these sacks this weekend.
The way that I see it is the Chargers game and loss was the ugly example of if they're going to blitz everybody 80% of the time, and then you don't have the other edge rusher not named Danielle Hunter getting to Herbert or Mahomes. Herbert showed what a really good quarterback could do. And I would say Mahomes is about 3 times as good as Herbert. So if Herbert could do it, Mahomes is guaranteed to do it. Therefore, if Davenport can create the pressure organically, then it should allow Ivan Pace or Harrison Smith coming off the edge or through the gap to do the thing. Otherwise, if Davenport has one of those inconsistent games, I feel like we're just going to see a total sequel to what the Chargers were able to do, where it was like, oh, you're going to blitz on this play. You've already done that the last 7 plays. We're just going to throw it to Keenan Allen, and he'll catch it for 7, fall forward for 3, and that's bada bing.
Yeah, that's a really good segue into my third point. You said Marcus Davenport's going to be the X factor in this game. I think it's Byron Murphy, honestly, because we saw that week 3 game against the Chargers. He got absolutely lit up. 10 catches against him for 185 yards. Most of those came while he was guarding Keenan Allen, if I remember correctly. But yeah, they can't give up these underneath throws because, like you mentioned, Patrick Mahomes is going to be able to hit those all day long. So they need Byron Murphy to stick to whoever his guy is all afternoon. He's definitely been a mixed bag this season. He had a really strong first week against Buccaneers, and then he had another pretty solid game last weekend against the Panthers. But those middle 2 games, he kind of got his ass kicked a little bit in those matchups. So I think they need a bounce back game for sure from Byron Murphy if they're going to win this game.
In everything we've said back from late February, especially March on, is at least we got Byron Murphy. That was like the one, and I was always skittish about that because you pull up his PFF resume and it was always just decent. It was never great. We kind of treated the offseason as if they had signed prime Jalen Ramsey and then the rest would figure itself out. In reality, to 4 games, you got a pretty decent corner along with some other decent corners that are gelling together, hopefully to get hot on the fly and do something. But yeah, Murphy, at least in terms of the contract, he's like arguably playing to the level of the contract, playing pretty decent. Will probably get better as the season goes on. But I think reputationally, because we were so scared about Shelley leaving and Patrick Peterson leaving, we needed Murphy to be a lockdown CB1. And to date, he's not that. He's just a decent CB.
Yeah, it's definitely been Caleb Evans who's been that lockdown CB for him so far this season, which is a little bit of a surprise. But I mean, for that draft class that doesn't look too great right now, I mean, I'll definitely take that from at least one of these guys being able to show up and make some plays on the field. So if Byron Murphy can at least bounce back and play up to that contract that he got of $17.5 million over the next 2 years, then they've got 2 decent corners, and that's pretty much the recipe for success with this secondary. As long as you got Harrison Smith healthy back there, Josh Metellus has played out of his mind. Cam Bynum's been one of the best safeties in the entire league, which is a huge surprise, at least for me, through 4 weeks of the year. So if Byron Murphy bounces back, they've got a pretty solid 5 back there.
It's a huge surprise on Bynum for me too, because I thought Lewis Seen would be ready to actually play football, or at least get in the lineup, and therefore I had Bynum as a roster cut on a couple of my projections.
Same.
Shame on me. All right, so all of your keys to the Vikings dub here are defense.
Yes.
So I'm going to pick your brain a little bit on a couple other items, starting with Dalton Reisner. That man was signed for starters money, expandable deal up to $4 million. And we have this, I guess, really good good debate, I should say, that per the metrics, the offensive line is quite good. To the
It's
eye
probably the
test,
best part of this team right now.
yeah, and but it's such a weird ass thing that the Vikings finally have a good offensive line, even with pass protection, and we don't believe it, or we don't see it translate to, oh, look at that pocket the Cousins have. So, A, I want to ask you, do you think that Reisner will unceremoniously just be in the lineup one day? And B, does all of the evidence suggest that because this offensive line is doing the part, that Kirk Cousins is holding on to the ball and there's no other explanation for it too long?
I think it's a couple different things. One, I think this offensive line has random moments where they just totally break down, especially on that right side with Ed Ingram, where he just has these random plays where it doesn't look like he really knows what he's supposed to do in the moment. But I do think that Kirk Cousins is just it's a matter of him needing to get rid of the ball a little bit faster. And I don't know if that's totally on him or if it's partly because of the scheme that Kevin O'Connell's running, where he's trying to get some of these wide receivers open deep and he's just hoping that the line holds up enough for him to be able to make plays. But yeah, I do think that Cousins needs to get rid of the ball a little bit faster. His internal clock needs to go a little bit quicker than it has over the first 4 weeks of the season. And I think he did a pretty decent job of that last year. It's just a matter of getting back up to where he was last season because, I mean, outside of some of these QB hits, some of the sacks that he's been taking, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the entire league in terms of statistics, at least. And PFF, I think, had him as their QB7 through week 4, which, I mean, I'll take that any day of the week too. Like if you got a top 10 QB and you got a strong offensive line, it should be a team that's winning some games, and they just haven't really been able to put all the pieces together until last weekend. So yeah, I do think that is it's a couple different things. I'm not really sure which one is to blame the most. But as for Reisner, I think if there's a game that he should be playing, it's probably this weekend, considering he's played 2 games against the Chiefs every single year for the first 4 years of his career. If there's nobody on this team that knows the Chiefs better than Dalton Reisner does, at least in terms of their defense, their offense, what they usually try to run. So yeah, if there's a week for him to get on the field, I feel like it's this one. But like you said, with how strong this offensive line has been, and at least in terms of the overall protection, the overall run blocking, they don't necessarily need him, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see him out there this weekend.
Yeah, it's one thing if he signed for a vet minimum, and then it wouldn't really matter. But if you're paying him up to $4 million, I can't remember what his clauses are to get from 2.5 to 4 million. And I know there's the throwing in the towel aspect on Ed Ingram, assuming that that's the spot he would take. So it's dicey there, but for that contract, he should probably see the field for too long. Let me give you, so interestingly, I think our keys to how the Vikings will win are mostly different, aside from perhaps this first one. And I came up with these, and I'll let you get your reaction to them under the pretense that the Chiefs aren't going to have one of their quiet games. There's always a chance that they have one of those games where you're like, this doesn't look like the Chiefs. Kind of happened in week 1 against the Lions. And there is that chance. It's just I'm cynical enough to believe it won't be good things happening to the Vikings. So my first one is, for the love of God, they cannot abandon the run. If you look up and down the stats on offense, I know you post them weekly on Purple PTSD because I love reading them. I'm convinced that when things start to get a little muddy, Kevin O'Connell, a former quarterback's like, all right, well, we're not going to be running it. We're down by a touchdown, so we're going to be throwing it from here on out. And that's how we get in this hole, where we're throwing it 80% of the time. And that's great. Everybody loves passing. But in terms to eventually fix this time of possession thing, the Vikings rank like 4th worst in time of possession. And that usually means you're a bad football team. You have to stay committed to running the football, not like Mike Zimmer, but like 35 or 40% of the time. And
yeah, it doesn't have to be all the time, but definitely mix it in, because even with these last 2 games that have been pretty decent in the running game, they're still ranked last in carries, which is just crazy.
It feels like a revelation that they realized starting last week against the Chargers, 2 weeks ago against the Chargers. I think the first 7 plays were runs to Madison, and they worked. So I believe that they understand that and are on the way to fixing it. But the problem is, when you don't run the football, you become very predictable, and then you have 3 and outs like none other, because incomplete pass. All right, the defense is back on the field, and they're trying to learn all of their shit in addition. And then you look up, and the time of possession is 39 minutes to 21, and you're like, maybe they'll win this game and it'll be really, really lucky. So I think that out of the gate and continue, even if they're down 14-0, it's still mix in the run. Every 3 drives, start with an Alexander Madison carry or give it to Akers, and just don't abandon it unless it's something murderous like 24-0. Then you have to go the Colts game on the bit. I think that happens too often in Kevin O'Connell's play calling, is that he gets nervous, antsy, and says, all right, well, I'm a quarterback, so what would I do in the situation? Well, I'm going to throw it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I do think that they definitely need to mix in the run a little bit more than they have. And last week, Kirk Cousins was pretty horrible last weekend, and the running game kind of saved their ass with how good.
Segue.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I do think that they need to get this running game a little bit more involved. I think they will do it this weekend. Kansas City hasn't exactly been the greatest in terms of their run stopping ability throughout the first 4 weeks. So I think that that's going to be something that they try to do a little bit more often as they have for the past couple weeks. And I think they're slowly starting to figure some of these things out that they need to get better at.
The Chiefs pass defense DVOA ranks 10th. The Chiefs run defense DVOA ranks 20th. So if you decide you're going to abandon the run, you're doing it against the better judgment of your play calling, because the weakness of the Chiefs defense to a degree is rush defense. My segue is they're not going to get away with bad Kirk or mediocre Kirk in beating the Chiefs. Even if they decide they're going to have a couple turnovers, I'll get to that in a second. In unison, we need the week 1, 2, 3 or Kirk to play against the Chiefs with a defense that resembles the Panthers game a little bit. The Vikings got very lucky that Cousins had 2 strange transactions with interceptions, and then they lost the turnover battle, they lost that too. The time of possession battle by 17 minutes, and then they still won. That's the perk of playing a team that's deprived of talent like the Panthers. So once and for all, and hopefully henceforth, the good version of Cousins needs to align with the Flores defense that is doing well. All of the Viking season, I could write a book about it and fill it with 70,000 words, is disjointed sessions of positivity not happening at the same time. The first half against the Buccaneers, the defense looked great. I was texting Yannick Eckhart, if this is the Flores defense, Vikings offense is eventually going to start humming, and this team's going to be really good. And then the defense went to sleep for 2.5 games. And then Cousins is balling out, leading the NFL in passing yards and touchdowns. And then the defense shows up, but Cousins takes a nap and decides to throw picks. These guys can be good if they figure it all out in unison. My final one, and I'll get you off air here, is so obvious, is the turnover battle. I said last week after they're 0-3, it really doesn't matter that we're bitching about turnover battle because they continue to do it anyhow. Like, even if they fix it, they probably have it in their DNA. It's going to show up once again. But I will revise that. If you look at any of Ben Baldwin's analytical metrics and you curiously subtract the turnovers, the Vikings are an absolutely phenomenal football team. They're right there with the Bills. They're right there with these Chiefs. So there's this utopia that if and I'm not calling for a complete cessation of turnovers, that we're going to have 0 in the next 6 games. I mean, just 1 per game. And then that's it. Yep. If it has to be a pick that's tipped, great. Or if so-and-so, KJ Osborne drops a fumble, just 1 per game, and then force a couple on your own. If the Vikings can get to a normal amount of turnovers that isn't, leading the league or 4 fumbles per game, man, the sky is the limit. And I know it's probably irritating to listeners to hear that or viewers to watch it, but it's the honest to goodness truth. It's the only thing separating this offense from really humming. It has the big plays. It's 3rd in the league in 15-plus yard gains. Jefferson is leading the league in receiving yards and going to probably break 2,000. Cam Akers and 8 yards per carry. All of the stuff is good, but it's just shot in the foot when some moron fumbles it, or Cousins is throwing 99-yard pick sixes. All of those things, not abandoning the run, the good version of Kirk, and having an average person's turnover battle, if those all happen, I do believe the Vikings can win. But it's just the problem is you're asking too much because none of those things happen all together in the same game. What do you got for your closing arguments?
I do think I'm going to allude back to your turnover thing because, they do need to cut down on those. But I think that they turned the ball over pretty regularly last season too. Mm-hmm. Kirk Cousins threw 14 interceptions. They had a few fumbles that they lost, but it was buoyed by the fact that their defense was able to force some turnovers at really key times too. Like Looking back at week 10 against the Bills with Patrick Peterson's game-ending interception there. They had a few really nice turnovers at really great times on the defensive side. And right now that just hasn't really happened. And if they can sort of create some of their own turnovers and get the ball back in Cousins' hands while he's zipping the ball to Justin Jefferson and making the great plays, I feel like I'm in a much better spot with this team. Just buoy the turnover battle. Don't lose by 2 or 3 every single game, and I think they'll be fine.
And surprise, surprise, when they did force one of their turnovers last week and they took it back for 59 yards, that changed everything. Yep. And that was basically how the 2022 Vikings and 2022 Vikings defense did things. And that was the difference. I tweeted it felt exactly like the Miami Dolphins game where we were on edge last year. That was October something. We were like, God, this team just cannot get it together. And then after Dalvin Cook's touchdown, it was like, God, we're back. Right. Yeah. As soon as Wanham took that back, and then let's see, I think Cousins connected with Jay Jets a couple like 10 minutes later in real time for that offsides touchdown. It was like, oh, yeah, this thing's good. And that's what the 2022 team did almost every week. All right, man. Yeah, this game is curious. I think the Vikings. Oh, I just said all this good shit. I think the Vikings lose 30-20. What's your prediction?
I'm gonna go a little bit closer. I think the Vikings are gonna cover the spread, but Chiefs on top 24-20 this weekend.
Ooh, okay. So not necessarily a shootout. All right, kind sir. Enjoy Damian Lillard to your basketball team.
I will.
Notably, you're not a Twins fan. Enjoy your baseball team. And we shall hopefully talk to you about the 2-3 Vikings in 1 week. All right.
Sounds great, man. See you then.
All right.